Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the new Nikon Z5II. I've been able to use this camera in a wealth of different environments, from mountain wildlife to landscapes to architecture to street photography over the past couple of months, and I'm going to talk you through some of the things that I like about it, some of the things I don't, and we'll also talk about why this might sound like a normal upgrade to the original Z5, but actually it's way more than that, and maybe it's a really good upgrade for those of you that have a Z6 or a Z6II, and maybe even the right camera for you if you were thinking about a Z6 III but haven't quite bought one yet. So we'll talk about all the things that are involved in this Z5II and what makes it really quite an interesting camera, especially when you consider its price point. So first things first, what's changed with the Z5II on the outside of the camera? So first of all, versus the original Z5, there's a couple of new button placements and a couple of new buttons as well, and it falls in line with the button design that we've seen in other Nikon Z series cameras, such as the Nikon Z8, the Z6 III, and also the Z5II. So the first thing is you'll see that the new placement of the playback button, so if you're coming from an original Z5, the playback button is now going to be in a new place. We also have a new button on the top of the camera, which is a dedicated button for picture controls, and we first saw this in the original Z52, so the Nikon have now brought this into the Z5II. The body itself is also physically larger with a deeper grip, and it's also slightly heavier than the original Z5. I'll put some measurements up on the screens to show you where this sits amongst some of the other bodies. We also have a new screen design. So the original Z5 just used the traditional kind of flip out screen that lets you shoot the camera low or shoot the camera high, but you couldn't really turn the screen round to photograph yourself. So with the Z5II, you now have the ability to use a full articulating flip out screen. I appreciate that these screens are personal preference, should we say. It is a really nice display. It's a 3.2-inch display, so a really nice size. It's a really high resolution. It's a higher resolution than the previous Z5 screen. Other changes are that we have two SD card slots on the side of the camera body. They are both UHS 2 speed card slots. One big change for the Z5II versus the original Z5 is the use of a grip. So the Z5 could get a battery pack that would let you use two batteries to give you extended battery life, but it didn't have a grip that had controls and buttons. So the Z5II can now be used with a grip that gives you full control with shutter buttons, dials, a focusing toggle, and an AF on button, and also lets you store two batteries as well. So this grip is a pre-existing grip, so you can either use the MBN11, which is the grip I have here, but you can also make use of the MBN14, and they will both fit the Nikon Z5II, allowing you to use two batteries in the grip, and also allowing the grip to be a charger as well. You can USB-C charge through the grip, and I really like the idea of using the grip as a dual charger. And when the grip is on the camera body, it does make it quite big, but for those of you that wanted to use a full-size grip with a Z5II, that is something that you can now do, which you couldn't do with the original Z5. You'll also see a slight difference in ports that are used, so you still have a headphone jack and a microphone jack, and that headphone jack can be used with the remote as well. You then have a USB-C port and a micro HDMI port versus what we had on the original Z5, where we had a different HDMI port. We also then had a separate remote port as well. So let's talk about some of the features on the inside of the Z5II. So internally, we have a new to the Z5II sensor, which is a 24 megapixel full frame BSI sensor. So that means it's backside illuminated, which means it's going to be giving you better ISO performance or better image quality in low light. It does mean that it's not stacked. So it's not going to be a stacked sensor like you'd find in the Z8, the Z9. It's not going to be a partially stacked sensor like you'd find in the Z6 III. So that means it's not going to be as fast. It's not going to give you as fast of a readout speed as you get in those other cameras, but it is still going to give you better image quality over the original Z5. That sensor is also then fully image stabilized, so it makes use of an in-body stabilization system. This in-body stabilization system has two ratings, and that's thanks to a feature that they use called Focus Point VR. So their in-body stabilization system can give you up to 7.5 stops of VR, or vibration reduction, if you're focusing on the subject in the center. What the image stabilization system can do is, based on the location of your focusing point, it can prioritize that portion of the frame and adjust the image stabilization system accordingly. So if you're in a situation where you're focusing on the left or the right hand side of your frame, or the top or the bottom, it can give you different image stabilization based on the location of your focusing point to make sure that your image is as still and as sharp as possible at slow shutter speeds, even when you're not focusing dead center. Most other traditional image stabilization systems will always just pivot around dead center, which is fine if your subject is in the middle, but if your subject is over to the left or to the right hand side, which it often is from a compositional point of view, then focus point VR can really help you. So when you're using focus point VR and you're focusing towards the edges of your frame, that image stabilization will then give you 6 stops of stabilization towards the edge and 7.5 at the center. Focus point VR isn't new to Nikon cameras. We have seen it previously in the Nikon ZF, and we've also seen it previously in the Nikon Z6III. The other major change to the Z5II is when it comes to the processor. So the Expeed 7 processor in the Z5II is the same processor we will see in the Z8, Z9, Z6III, and the ZF, and also the Z5II. So it's in a lot of Nikon cameras now, and it means it brings with it a wealth of new features and also just general speed improvements as well. So the first one that's really changed is autofocus. The autofocusing system of the Z5II is completely different to the original Z5. They share very few things. And it's the same focusing system in terms of options and customization that you'll find on the Z8 and the Z9. So you have the full suite of subject detection options. If you want to use the subject detection for people, animals, vehicles, birds, aeroplanes, that's all in there. And you can choose to either leave that in automatic, or you can choose your specific category of subject. If you're specifically photographing birds, then choose birds. If you're specifically photographing airplanes, people, and so on, you can choose which is right for you. So the Z5II can detect a subject even if it only covers 3% of the frame. So if the subject is very small in the frame, the camera can still detect that subject and see it at a greater distance. This is particularly useful if you're dealing with small subjects like birds, but also useful if you don't quite have the right focal length. So if your focal length is a little bit too short and you can't quite get close enough to the subject, then that can also really help you. Now, the two really big changes to autofocus for me, especially against the original Z5, are the overall focusing speed. So point-to-point focusing speed is significantly faster, 68% faster. And you do really notice that when you're just kind of moving from one subject to another, or if you're tracking a moving subject. The Z5II is just a lot faster. And when you are using your Z5II in low light, you can now focus down to -10 EV on the Z5II versus -4.5 EV on the Z5, which is significantly different. It's a lot lower light scenarios that you can use the Z5II in and still get the camera to accurately and clearly focus versus the original, which often struggled in low light scenarios. The Expeed 7 also brings with it faster frame rates, so we can now shoot up to 30 frames per second, which will be JPEG, but it allows you to shoot at that high frame rate and capture 30 frames per second, along with pre-release capture. Pre-release capture is again something we've seen in other cameras. It allows you to take pictures before you even taken pictures, which means that there's always a rolling buffer of images before you fully press the shutter button. It activates when you start focusing, and it will then save 1 second's worth of images prior to you pressing the shutter button. So whenever you press the shutter button, 1 second's worth of images gets saved to the memory card. If you're shooting at 30 frames a second, that gives you 30 images of what happened 1 second before you press the shutter button. Great if you're shooting wildlife, sports, or if you're just waiting for something to happen and you don't want to miss it, you can use pre-release for that. Yes, it does not let you shoot RAW in pre-release. I wish it did. I wish that there was a way that we could shoot high efficiency pre-release. So even if we just got high efficiency files for pre-release, they would still be RAW files, because high efficiency RAW files are fantastic. It's just JPEG images, not RAW files when using pre-release, unfortunately. One other major hardware change is going to be when it comes to the viewfinder. Now, the viewfinder is the same resolution as the original Z5, but it's going to be considerably brighter. And in a lot of Nikon's newer cameras, they've been releasing brighter and brighter viewfinders, and I often think it's a specification that's overlooked, because it works so well if you are shooting in bright conditions when you're dealing with wildlife and sports, and you want your viewfinder to be as bright as the sunlight that's around you or as bright as the conditions that you're shooting in, it makes a huge difference to be able to look through an incredibly bright viewfinder and it look identical to the environment around you. That was one of the major advantages of using an optical viewfinder, is because the light that came through the lens was as bright as the light that was around you. So being able to increase your brightness to match really bright sunny conditions makes a huge difference, makes it way easier for you to see your subject, way easier for you to see the edges of your frame, and just makes an all-round better viewing experience. The brightness of the viewfinder can go up to a maximum of 3000 nits, which is considerably brighter than the original Z5, and is the same brightness as you'll find in the Z8 and the Z9. It's only surpassed by the viewfinder of the Z6 III, which is a higher resolution and is also a brighter viewfinder at 4000 nits. Let's talk a little bit about video. So, the original Z5, and I think I even said this myself, is really pitched as a stills first camera. It was a photographer's first camera because it allowed you to shoot video, but it didn't really give you many video options. It was there if you wanted to use it, but there was nothing really groundbreaking. It did 4K at 30 frames a second, but didn't really give you any of the advanced features that you would have got with, say, the Z6 or the Z6 II. And that was previously the distinction between the Z5 and the Z6. They were similar in stills, but they had a massive difference when it came to video. And that is no longer the case. So the Z5II employs significantly better video features than the Z6II and the Z6. It's not quite as good as the full-blown Z6 III is, but it's still going to be more than good enough for most people. So if you are interested in a hybrid camera that gives you really good stills and really good video, the Z5II is actually a really good consideration. Especially if you've already looked at a Z6 III and you think maybe the Z6 III is a bit too much. The Z6 III will still give you higher resolution and higher frame rates, but the Z5II could be a really nice hybrid camera. So what can the Z5II do in video? So first of all, you can shoot 4K up to 60 frames a second. That 4K at 60 will be cropped. You'll be cropped to DX, which is a 1.5 times crop. That also includes 4K at 50 frames. So 4K 60 and 50 are cropped. Every other resolution and frame rate are not cropped. So that's where you can shoot at 4K 30, at 4K 25, 24. At 1080, you can do up to 120 frames per second, and then also all of the other frame rates as well. But it's not the resolution and the frame rates that's impressive about the Z5II when it comes to video. What is impressive is the file formats. The Z5II will let you shoot 10-bit with an N-Log profile, and that's normal now across Nikon cameras. The Z5II and the ZF will let you shoot 10-bit with an N-Log profile. But what is new is that the Z5II is the first camera that will let you shoot raw video internally to the SD card. I mentioned earlier about both of those card slots being UHS-2. That UHS-2 speed is there to allow you to record raw internally directly to the SD card slot. Now, I appreciate that raw video is still difficult to edit, difficult to use, and there might be some of you that are like, well, it's not a massive feature, I'm not going to use that, but it's there if you need it, and it's a really great entryway or a gateway into raw video editing if you've never done it before. So it's not going to be for everybody, but to think about having a Nikon Z5II that can shoot raw video internally to the SD card is pretty impressive, considering where Nikon were in video one generation ago with the original Z5. So that is pretty impressive. Now, in terms of how long that will run for and whether it overheats, all that type of stuff, I've done that testing, so I'll show you some of the results on that. So I was able to record in 4K at 30 frames a second in RAW internally to an SD card for 1 hour and 58 minutes. That is the point at which the battery died, and there was no overheating. It was just the battery dying that caused the limitation. And to be able to record for that long, I was using a 512 gigabyte Delkin Black SD card, which is a UHS-2 speed card. Obviously, when you're recording with N-Log, you can also then make use of the free LUTs that you can download from Nikon that were made by Red, and they can be really useful for those of you who want to color grade and give you a distinct look to your videos as well. The Nikon Z5II is weather sealed to the same level as the Z6 III, so offers you a really nice weather sealing if you're planning on using it out and about for landscapes, wildlife, and you happen to get caught in the rain. And it's also not missing out when it comes to materials used on the body. The Z5II uses magnesium alloy on the front, top, and the back of the camera. The Z5II also brings a feature that I really like, which is called touch function, and this is thanks to the vari-angle screen. So when you fold the vari-angle screen back against the camera and you look through the viewfinder, you can use the touchscreen as another dial. You can use it to change settings, or my favorite is you can use it to move your focusing point. So if you don't like using the joystick or the directional pad, you can use the touchscreen to move your focusing point around with your thumb. Really nice and responsive, and a really useful way of using the touchscreen. For those of you that are unaware, the Nikon Imaging Cloud lets you directly upload images from your camera to store in the cloud for free for 30 days, and you can then pass that on to other cloud services if you want to, where you can permanently store them, whether that's things like Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, Adobe's Cloud. It's entirely up to you. But as long as your camera's connected to Wi-Fi, you don't need to use an app. You just need to make sure that you register the camera to your cloud account first. And so once you've done that registration process, you don't need any apps or a phone or anything like that. You just connect your camera to any Wi-Fi network and it will then start uploading your images to the cloud. It actually works really well, and it's something that I use a lot on my Z6 III. And it also brings with it not just the ability to upload your images as using them as a backup, but it also allows you to download firmware updates directly to the camera, meaning you don't have to use a card reader and then put the card in the card reader and put the file on the card and go through that process like we had to do previously with other cameras like the Z8, for example. So who is this camera for? Well, clearly, if you're a Z5 user, the Z5II is a massive upgrade over the original Z5 and improves upon that in pretty much every way. If you are a Z6 or a Z6II user, then you get massive improvements to autofocus, an entirely new autofocusing system. You get a slight improvement to image quality and also a slightly different layout. Obviously, there will be things that will be different, such as memory cards, so Z6 and Z6II using CF Express versus Z5 using only SD cards. Obviously, when comparing it against the Z6 and the Z6II, the Z6 III exists. But I appreciate that there might be some of you that chose not to upgrade to a Z6 III because it had things that you just didn't need, which is fine. So in those situations, the Z5II could be a really good upgrade to the Z6 and the Z6 II. The other option you could look at is the Nikon ZF. The Nikon ZF is very similar to the Z5II in terms of the sensor, the processor, the focusing system, but it's in a completely different body. So it's different dials, different controls. I often speak a lot about how I really enjoy using my ZF. And if you really like the idea of using the tactile dials, then the ZF is also a really good camera to consider. The other choice is the new Z5II, which obviously only recently launched. The big difference is that this is a DX smaller size sensor, so it's a 20 megapixel DX imaging sensor. It is also a significantly smaller and lighter body. So you might still feel like DX is the way to go. The focusing system of the Z5II is fantastic. Same focusing system as what you get in the Z5II, but it just comes down to sensor size, whether you want full frame or crop DX, for example. I would be hard pushed to decide between these two because they are very similar. It's just that the Z5II is smaller, lighter, smaller size sensor. The viewfinder is a bit different. The big reason why I would probably go for a Z5II over a Z5II is actually because of the batteries that they use and because of their memory card slots. So the Z5II only lets me use one card slot, and it's a different battery system to what you will find in the Z5II. So Z5 uses the bigger battery and you have two card slots, so it's just all round a bit of a more professional style camera, and fits in line really nicely with the Z6s, the Z7s, the Z8s. So it's an incredibly good all-round camera and vastly improves on the previous generation, and I feel like it could actually be the right camera to upgrade to for those of you that maybe skipped on the Z6 III. I do hope that you found everything in this video useful. If you have any questions or comments about the video, then please do put them in the comments below. I'll try and get back to you, as many of you as I can. I've got a really interesting lens video coming up from a different lens manufacturer, and I'm really excited about it because it's one of my favorite focal lengths. So do keep an eye out for that, and I will see you all again very soon. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.